Okay.
Fine.
We're just going to use the red stuff as a measure on budget.
Do we have a time limit? As in,
I'll message Jeff and see what she thinks. But yeah, we need to keep it
well, I know it's Australian, so.
Okay. I don't have, I can't pull her on this. She's not ideal. Yeah, maybe. That would be handy, thank you.
We might be giving a replacement charge.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I've messaged her. She hasn't replied yet.
We're being sent the
She's not yet replied, but she has seen it, so.
I assume David has.
Yeah, no, I think they're sending in a replacement charge.
I sent a link on the WB group. Can you just check if that's the right one?
Yeah, no, I agree.
And if it's not, find it on YouTube and send it for people? One week.
Yeah.
Is it the actual thing?
He's already done that. Like, he'll show up as a ring.
Okay, sure. So, we'll wait for him and then do the instructions and get into it.
Great, thanks.
Do we need to do a replacement issue? First thing is contact the CNT. They said there's a basement you definitely need it. It's just.
You guys can use the podium. Probably use the podium, right?
Gone in the last 20 minutes. Yeah.
David.
Yeah,
Hey.
I meant to fill in
Yes.
for someone.
No, you're not here to fill in. You're here to be David Harris.
I'm changing it to meet you. All right, sorry for the delay, everyone. We'll get started with the introductions. I'm James, I'm the chair for He.
My name's Shiraz. He.
David, he.
Hi, my name's Pranjal. I'm from Sicily. My name's Talha. Hear him.
Taha, he. Eric, he, they.
Alex Hiole. Michael, no preference.
Eli Hirde.
Roy Hiole.
All right, thanks everyone. We'll get started. I call the Prime Minister.
Art is important. Art is what people relate to. Art is something that people intimately and personally relate to with their personal lives and their understanding of social realities, both about themselves and other people. It is important and critical in how people identify themselves and how other people identify them. So when we understand how popular art is, we understand how deeply problematic it is for certain kinds of people. And to understand what popular art is and what it represents. Popular art right now represents the rich white-collar lifestyle and rich white-collar jobs and how they are glorified. We think that these kinds of lifestyles and these kinds of jobs, such as in shows like Suits, such as in shows like Mad Men, and different kinds of art are glorified and presented as desirable. This is problematic for multiple reasons. Number one, a vast majority of people do not subscribe to these kinds of lifestyles and this kind of work. But secondly, a vast majority of people simply cannot attain these kinds of lifestyles and these kinds of work because of things like racism, because of things of lack of educational opportunity, because of things like historical discrimination, gendered labor, and multiple other reasons. So what does this mean then? This means that the vast majority of people are represented in either a lack of representation or, for example, poor representation where their work and their lifestyles are denigrated. We think that the working class has been displayed in multiple ways. Number one, either it's been relegated to side characters or areas of lack of importance where they're shifted to the background and told that they are not important in the grander scheme of things, or secondly, they're actively denigrated. Working class jobs and working class lifestyles are shown as menial, where they're unimportant and anyone can do them, where they're shown as undesirable, as stuff that people simply should not do because they're bad, or where their language and culture has been shown to be inferior or bad compared to other kinds of languages and cultures. So what does this mean then for these people personally when they see this kind of art? This means that, number one, they're likely to personally denigrate themselves and feel unimportant and feel bad about themselves in the grander scheme of things. But secondly, it also means that they lack social respect and people are unlikely to treat them as equals or unlikely to treat them well within society. So what happens then and what are we trying to do? We think that we're going to actively subsidize work that glorifies these people. What do we mean by glorify? This means that, number one, we're going to make sure that they're represented by these subsidies, but also make sure that they're represented positively, where their work is actively glorified, where it's shown in a positive light, and is celebrated as something that is important and something that is good. Now, what does this mean for them, or what are the distinct impacts of them? The first and most important impact is that they actively feel good. And before we want to actually take you.
Yes, the glorification is just about their jobs, them, and their jobs are also like their lifestyle, their choices, stuff like that.
We think their lifestyle and their choices as well. We think that working class people live different lives. They, for example, don't go to posh restaurants. They don't go to, for example, certain activities that they can't afford. And we think that those should be glorified and celebrated as well as is art. Now, what does this mean? Number one, we think that they're likely to feel good about themselves and feel good about their lives personally. But number two, we also think that other people are likely to treat them with more respect. What does this mean? This means that, for example, people are unlikely to dismiss their opinions and dismiss them in social situations. It also means that they're less likely to be, for example, abusive towards people in working class jobs, like people are abusive to waiters, people are abusive to staff in general. But also, what this means is that they're likely to find more meaning in what they do and more meaning in their lives. And this not only has personal impacts on their feelings and their emotions, but it also has meaningful impacts on their lives. For example, they're likely to find more meaning in their work, which means that they're more likely to work harder, which means that they're more likely, this has multiple effects. Number one, it's not only the general economic effect of working harder, which means that they're likely to produce more, but also there's a personal effect to their personal lives. And that is, they're more likely to want to move up within the workplace. They're more likely to, for example, work harder and be more positive in the workplace, which means that they're likely to move up the hierarchy within their work, within their field, because they feel it as it is something meaningful. They feel more motivated, and it is something that they should directly pursue as a career path. And for those reasons, we think that all of those things are inherently positive for working class people. But secondly, and this is another argument, we think that a vast majority of people are working class, and the fact that they're not representative has been not only a current problem but a historical problem that has certain connotations to it. We think that the vast majority of working class people have not been represented poorly because their work, or the kind of work that represents them, has been actively suppressed by certain governments and by certain movements. What do we mean by this? We mean that certain kinds of governments, for example, governments who have been opposed to working class interests, like, for example, those opposed to communism, those opposed to leftist movements, have actively suppressed their work because, for example, during the Cold War, work that glorified the working class and their interests was seen as communist, was seen as leftist. We think that they've actively tried to denigrate this kind of work, they've actively tried to censor this kind of work, they've actively tried to make sure that it does not become popular. And what this means is that historically speaking, there's been a historical lack of this work being represented. And we think that then not only is there a practical outcome of this, but there's also a principal responsibility of these kinds of jobs, of these kinds of people being represented, because these kinds of governments, like especially the governments who are in the countries where art is produced the most, where the capitalist establishment, which is the United States, which is the United Kingdom, all of these kinds of governments have been actively complicit or active in discrimination of artists and art that has represented the working class. Before I move on, yeah, sure.
Okay, so if the working class representation is so deeply rooted in the politics, why would anyone watch what is essentially populist propaganda on your side?
We think lots of people would watch it. Number one, because we think that it relates to them personally, and because we think that's an important point. But also, secondly, even if some people don't encounter it, we think that at the very least there's a comparative existence of it as opposed to non-existence of it. So we think that even if, for example, not everyone watches this kind of art, on a comparative, at the very least, it exists and it is there to encounter for some people, as opposed to a world where it exists in fewer numbers and it's less likely to be encountered randomly when you're, for example, flipping through the deli, or, for example, going to random art exhibitions. We think that the fact that it exists means that at least some people are likely to watch it more comparative in our world. Now what have we shown to you in this debate? We've shown multiple things. We've shown you, number one, that art connects to people and art is important for people's self-esteem as well as how other people view them. We've shown you the practical impacts of this on, for example, people's work and people's lifestyles. We've shown you the fact that people are likely to feel better about themselves and why that's an important outcome we should care about. And number three, we've shown you how this is historically important, because this kind of work has been oppressed, has been actively discriminated against, and has been suppressed by governments. And for all those reasons, we urge you to vote open government.
Next speaker for that speech, and call on the Leader of the Opposition.
We think the opening government is off because of two things. The first is they talk almost exclusively about popular art. This means they don't debate art in general, but just a very restrictive aspect of it. But secondly, though, they don't even characterize properly what popular art looks like. Because they don't talk about shows such as Suits and things like that, glorifying white elitist, exclusionary lifestyles. We think that the converse. We think that firstly, they don't prove that harm is necessarily significant, but secondly, we think that it doesn't exist in the light that you try to paint it. We can just provide you with literally lots of counterexamples of how Suits is not the only popular thing, or whitest white-leaning like media is not the only thing that exists. If anything, we think that because art is about stories, because art is about like those stories of triumph and things like that, they exist more on our side with things such as Scandal, with things such as How to Get Away with Murder, which show black women who are previously who are very marginalized in American society triumphing. We don't think your OG has done enough to fully engage with this debate. But what we're going to tell you on the vocal. First thing we say, we do concede the purpose of art, right? It is something that's about meaning. It's something that is meaningful in terms of like your identity, in terms of how you perceive yourself in terms of the world. What we would say then is that principally, given that in status quo, what we've been seeing is a reclamation of the space of art, even in the extreme, or like in the extreme that we talk about in terms of popular art, an organic form of transformation occurring. We think subsidization removes the ability for marginalized groups to reclaim that. But secondly, though, we question the idea of glorification in and of itself, because we think that what they want on their side, by the conclusion of the PM speech, they want these stories to be told. They want these stories to be represented. They never want to do the analysis to say why glorification of that is necessary for that necessary for the representation and for those stories to be told. A few issues of more direct responses. The first thing then, under the idea of popular art, beyond just like them not necessarily proving that it's always exclusive, that it's always elitist, we think they still don't problematize enough why a state level subsidy is something that's likely to be beneficial for this. Because what we say now is that media, and popular media specifically, has been called out extensively for not being as transformative as it needs to be, for not being as inclusive as it needs to be. Oscars So White, like it shows, or like even with things such as like the streaming sector, which is now on the rise, we're getting more diverse stories because for once, minority groups or marginalized groups have finally been able to say, enough is enough, it's time for our stories to be told. We don't think then like a state level subsidy for those stories to be told is something which is likely to give us the greater outcome. What we would propose on our side is things such as if we are like to get these stories told out more, things such as like embettering the ability for individuals of these groups to access those type of platforms, things such as like theatre schools, or like building these building things like theatres in their communities. We don't think there's subsidy there. We think that the trade-off in terms of subsidizing that art being portrayed because it's already happening is not something that we're likely to do this. But secondly, they tell us that states have oftentimes been complicit in the marginalization of these individuals, therefore the state should play like a role in that enhancement. First thing to say is that there are multiple ways to do this beyond just like the subsidy. They never prove to us why this is the exclusive mechanism. But secondly, to say that like what the state can do is not necessarily glorify these arts, but rather tell those stories. We think that there's a distinction between that, which leads me onto my substantive. The first thing to say then is what does glorification likely look like, right? We say it is things such as celebrating those struggles, is things such as painting those struggles in the positive light. Because glorification essentially is about saying that this is a lifestyle which is desirable, or that this is a lifestyle which is good. Because there are one examples of glorification of white lifestyles is something that says this is something that you need to like aspire to, something that's like very great. We don't think that you need to glorify people living through a lot of struggle. You don't need to glorify individuals having their dignity oftentimes undermined in spaces, or not having access to spaces in a lot of times because of like the color of their skin or the sex that they were born with. That form of glorification is something that's likely to lead to the converse of what they argue, because it becomes, well, it's not that bad. Note, in popular media, we tell these stories through shows such as Atlanta, which shows how difficult it is for like young black men who are brought up in Atlanta, which is oftentimes poverty-stricken area, and like dealing with things such as drug addictions and trying to like make it. What these stories do, importantly, is they achieve their representation and tell that story, but not in a way that makes them seem like something to aspire to, something that's to be glorified. Because by emphasizing on those struggles, that's when you talk to like the individuals more personally and more closely. If they want individuals' identities and how they understand themselves within society, we think at the point where you glorify it in like very popular media, you give them an illusion, because you're likely to like downplay the struggles of like trying to make it and say, well, they make it. We think that giving individuals like not the clearest, fullest picture possible is something which is likely to be problematic. I would take closing.
The only way when your conditions are indignifying, if you subjectively perceive them to be indignifying, given that poor do not have any structural difference on your side of the house, it is better to make it more desirable.
We don't think you achieve structural difference either on your side, but on our side, what we do is we humanize their stories. We say these are individuals with real lives, and because of your positions of privilege, they are oftentimes pushed to the peripheries of society. On your side, you make being pushed to the peripheries not as big a deal because it's something which is glorified. We think you are worse off for these individuals. But secondly, though, we think the type of platforms that you're trying to do this are far worse because these are like capitalist and classist platforms which oftentimes are the cause of like that sort of subjugation, that sort of marginalization for these individuals. At the point where you try to empower them through like these same means, we think you are worse off than a complicit government. But lastly, we think in terms of lived experiences, we'd much rather prefer when, like, because the lived experience is something which is inextricably linked to like struggles for a working class individual. We think it's far better for like these artists to tell these stories themselves. Because note, a subsidy is likely to only work for artists who wouldn't have created this art in the absence of that subsidy. Because because art is about expression, it's about lived experiences. Individuals who already have that are more likely to produce that themselves organically. On their side, they encourage individuals who have likely benefited from like the type of system that has excluded individuals, or who don't necessarily value that or see that as a form of inspiration for their art, to now be moved and coerced into this type of industry. We think that the trade-off there is that individuals who have lived that experience now have to compete more. We think that individuals of the lived experience have a natural desire to tell these stories. But more importantly, these stories ought not be glorified because it's really hard. Panel, you need to stand for opening opposition.
Thank the Speaker for that speech and call on the Deputy Prime Minister.
How to Get Away with Murder celebrates a black successful lawyer who has a lot of money. We don't know why we should celebrate a lawyer instead of a black janitor who does not have that kind of money. We say, ladies and gentlemen, regardless of the profession in which you are occupied, we think that you deserve respect and you deserve dignity, something that you cannot get from their side of the house. Before I get into the rebuttals, let's just look at their mechanism, which is humanization. I want to point out a couple of things about this. One, this mechanism goes against one of their positive lines of analysis, which is to say that side government will be using capitalist and often classist platforms to represent these stories and use these stories. I'm unsure about the kinds of platforms these guys will use because I'm pretty sure that they will also be using Netflix. Let's move on to the other sorts of things that they say. Humanization. We think that it is far better in our world for this art to be glorified and subsidized and be on the first page of news sites, or be like on BBC platforms and whatnot, as opposed to like on the 8th page. So we think a lot more people will be consuming this art on the comparative, as opposed to their art, which may or may not be humanized. But lastly, why are you unlikely to want to produce these kinds of art? Because notice, while we will agree on side government that there has been a push towards accepting diversity, most of this push has been about accepting races and accepting different sexual orientations and whatnot, not different classes, not different professions. So the metric that we use in the status quo is, if this black guy can become rich and successful as a lawyer or as a white-collar worker, then they deserve respect. Notice that respect for occupations for other black people who can't achieve this is not there. But also notice that they have no rebuttals to what we have been saying to side government. That is to say that the vast majority of art that exists in the status quo is art that glorifies white-collar jobs. And I'm going to give you structural reasons for why. Because one, as they correctly point out, the vast majority of media houses or people that produce this art are often very rich, which is to say, to own a media company, you need to be rich, and therefore you're going to prefer your lifestyle over other lifestyle. But secondly, the kinds of writers you employ, the kinds of artists you employ, the kinds of actors you employ often go to like big universities where they've gotten art degrees from. Notice that most of these people have nothing to do with the working class. They can't simply relate. Therefore, the kinds of art they produce are likely to be art that glorifies their lifestyle, which is to say that you will not get this kind of representation that these guys have been talking about. They've been simply assertive about this. We do not agree. Now let's get into other things, which is to say that this art is always going to be like exclusive, and their whole point about like glorification means that people will say, oh, it's not that bad, and they will continue to do this. I want to point out one thing. One, we can pick and choose between which sort of art we're subsidizing with the government. We're not going to subsidize all of art, like we don't have unlimited resources, and also we don't have unlimited airtime and time to show this art. Which is to say that if there is a show which says it's okay to be abused by a boss, feel happy that you're a janitor, we're probably not going to subsidize it. We're going to go for the shows that says it's okay to be a janitor, it's okay to respect yourself. That's one. But secondly, ladies and gentlemen, we think it's not that bad, it's actually a benefit on our side. Why? Because notice the kind of structural reasons that Vani gave you, that these people are unlikely to get other forms of lifestyle. One, if I come from a poor neighborhood, I'm unlikely to ever get the kind of education which means that I will be able to be socially mobile. I cannot access white-collar jobs because I'm not educated. I might be racially discriminated against, which is to say that I might not be able to climb the social ladder. I might be a woman who cannot get up the social ladder because of the glass ceiling. There are structural barriers to achieving the kinds of white-collar success that you have, which is also, and there's another thing, which is to say that the vast majority of jobs in the world are often working-class jobs, not the kinds of jobs that are on the top. Which is to say, ladies and gentlemen, that we think that on our side we get much better representation, and because the vast majority of people can't achieve those jobs and are stuck in those jobs, it is better to make them feel happy, to make them feel that their lives are fulfilling, as opposed to them feeling till they die that they are shit and they cannot do anything about it. We think that it's much better to give them some form of representation as opposed to no representation at all. I'll take those.
It seems OG thinks that the government is a very benevolent body that only wants the fair representation of working class people. How is that logical, given your own analysis that many times the cause of problems?
I think we can just react this, which is to say that the government, given that it's subsidizing it, like in the real world, the government won't even subsidize it because of the kind of characterization we're saying. So we can react this and to say that the government is fairly like there. Now, to the point about artists, and this is where I give you more positive analysis on our side. We think that artists coming from working class backgrounds are much better off in our world. That's simply because the kinds of that you've increased the demand for art, which is that if the government is subsidizing this art, there are more platforms for this art to come up. You're going to give them more airtime and whatnot, which means that there's more demand for it. We think that the kinds of people who are likely to produce this kind of art are often from working class backgrounds, because again, they relate to it more. Their experiences are of being working class citizens and whatnots. Given that they relate to it more, we think that they're more likely to produce this kind of art. Notice that this is a benefit on our side of the house because they now get more jobs. They now get more opportunities. They can actually become more socially mobile than they were before. That's first benefit. But the second thing we see, ladies and gentlemen, is often in working class communities, people are strayed away from art. So if I want to be an artist and I belong to a poor Pakistani neighborhood, my parents will say, don't do this because of the uncertain rewards that art gives you. It is much better to go into a job which will pay you like less amounts of money, but will still give you consistent pay, as opposed to a job that will not give you pay at all, especially given that you won't have the kinds of opportunities that we give you in our world. We think that lots of people who don't pursue art will be able to pursue art and be socially mobile and successful in our world, which is a crucial benefit that we give you on opening government. But secondly, we also think that you are more likely to demand respect in the workplace, because notice, if you tell janitors or other people in working class jobs that you deserve respect, that you should be happy, that your way of life is the ideal way of life, we think that they're likely to respect themselves, which is a benefit in and of itself. But crucially, if I respect myself, I will also want to demand respect from others, which is to say that if bosses treat me poorly, if they abuse me, we think that these people are likely to stand up because they respect who they are. They respect their professions. We think that this is unlikely to happen in their world. But also things that I talked about. We gave you specific benefits that are unengaged with. One, personal fulfillment of these people that you do not get in their world. Two, we think that the fact that you're personally fulfilled also means that you're likely to be more productive because you feel good about the job that you're doing. You're more interested in the job that you're doing. But three, the benefit that also accrues from that, because if I start performing well in my job because I feel happy about that job, because I feel fulfilled with that job, I'm also likely to climb up the social ladder, perhaps become a manager in my own factory and stuff like that. So we think that if you're more productive as a working class worker, you're likely to get better life opportunities in the future. But lastly, state duty and representation. We think that for example, the General Ziaul Haq regime in Pakistan specifically clamped down on this kind of art. They clamped down on working class art, and they clamped down on all this art because they were opposed to leftist movements. Leftist movements were their major source of opposition in this kind of period. And they were often also opposition because the United States of America was opposing them. We think that these states specifically owe a duty because they took this art, they censored this art. We think that this is a means for them to repay this, and this is direct reparation. Because if you took their opportunity away, the only means of reparation is giving them that opportunity, giving them that money, giving them all that sort of respect. For all these reasons, very proud.
And to speak for that speech, and call on the Deputy Leader.
There's a big misunderstanding of the term glorification. We think that the opposite term that we could use is glamorization of those the working class. I think the danger is in this debate. There's nothing nice about being a helper. There's nothing nice about being a janitor. The bigger harm in this debate is that you give subsidies to tell stories of people's lived experience in a glamorized manner or in a glorified manner. You tell those people who relate with that art that it's okay to be that. We think that the danger again with that is that the kind of empowerment they require for the working class is an empowerment that continues the perpetual conception of being a low class or a working class member in society. But we think secondly, working class people exist because of the failings of the state and the failings of government, right? We tell you that when government fails to protect or empower people in terms of education, in terms of access, the government then can then subsidize big companies to tell stories of their own failings. We think that it is unfair from opening government or government in today's debate to not justify why firstly this subsidy is something that is necessary and something that will then benefit the working class. But secondly, to not justify that is there even a need to subsidize this kind of art, right? Note that the context where they then place this debate, right, is the context of popular art, where now everyone will now start having opinions about the working class, where everyone can now engage the conversation that they cannot even relate to and own the narrative, which are the dangers that I'll speak to in my speech in today's debate, right? A few issues of reconstruction. We tell you, Eric told you about the purpose of art, about how it's important from the expression and how people identify with art, right? We say that additionally, we also told you that these platforms that they existed are platforms where firstly are owned by the very same people that they speak about who are problematic. These companies, these production companies and these companies that tell stories are companies that are predominantly not from the working class, where they own the narrative. They can tell the stories, not the genuine story, but tell the story in such a manner to make profit out of those stories. We think it's particularly dangerous, especially owning experiences of the working class in this debate. Okay, what I will do in my debate, in my speech, I'll show you that firstly, this is not in the best interest of the working class, right? But secondly, this doesn't better the kind of conversation that we have, because from Eric's speech, he tells that we'd rather tell success stories such as the Annalise Keating. Annalise Keating was not just born as an actor. If you've watched the series, you see that this progression of her lived experience, being a woman, lived experience being a black woman, lived experience by representing systems like the jail system, about the very same working class that we speak about. We say those kind of, or the kind of telling of the story is one that we accept versus the kind of telling the story that portrays or glamorizes the working class in order to make profit. We think it's not justified in today's debate. Okay, cool. Let's first start with the first idea, and the first idea, which also will include or will respond to opening government in this debate. Right? The first idea in this debate is that who, and in the context we speak about the popular art, who owns the narrative or who owns power to tell the stories? We tell you it's rich white companies who at its core or their core is to make profit out of telling that art. We say the danger in this, and this is why it speaks about organic interpretation of lived experience of the working class, is that the moment to them they want to tell a story of a janitor or to tell a story of a helper, they will show the extreme way or the extreme form of that working class. This is harmful, but what it does, it justifies the perceptions that people have, for example, say about women, justify the perceptions that people have about black people, or justify about people of other positions or other things that they hold. We think this is then particularly dangerous because to them, they want to make profit, but additionally, they're telling stories that are not even theirs to begin with, right? We say the danger of this, and there's a danger about art also, is not, we don't want to create or start now legitimizing creators of art to tell stories, because what Eric also tells you is that the most people who usually speak about these forms of art or speak for the working class are people who most likely won't even get these subsidies because of the competition at the storytelling level in the popular content that they speak about. So ultimately, these stories led to those people, and it's dangerous to give those stories there. We say again, the subsidy or the government subsidies where are most effective effective. Because government subsidies are most effective when we empower these people, when we send a lot of black and low-class working people to art schools where they can have access, because if you know right now that the funding around art as a faculty itself is non-existent or close to zero. The reason for this also is that because it is not seen as something that is accessible, but the people who go study art are people who come from rich families, people who have access to even enter those spaces. We say government subsidies are best in those industries versus the industries of them telling the story and narrating and glorifying it in that nature. But before I continue to the second point, yes.
Why is it not okay to glamorize the lifestyles of people who almost certainly cannot attain other lifestyles?
Note the way to glamorize and note how you use it in your debate. You say you want to empower them. They might see it as an okay thing to do in their in society. You use words like it's okay for them to even defend their professions. We told you in my opening that those professions is not a profession they chose to be in to begin with. Those are professions where they were pushed into be by the failings of the very same state. So you can't come to this debate and say that we are okay with the glamorization or the glorification of those instances which are failings of the state, but additionally of instances where you legitimize and tell the perception to those people. We are profoundly proud to oppose that notion, right? We say firstly, then the other idea is then that we'd rather than alternatively even glorify success stories, which is what is currently even happening in the popular industry that they speak about, right? Glorify success stories that you can be born from a janitor's household family or be born from a helper household family, but you can achieve other means as a person who is not privileged. We say those kind of stories are important because what they do is that they don't say it's okay or they don't celebrate or glorify stories of suffering, but what they do is that they celebrate stories of you moving on and progressing as a person who was previously born from instances that are able to or barriers that exist. This is then particularly important because we say that people better relate with those stories, right? So when I see Annalise Keating or when I see Olivia Pope occupying positions of power, we see there's a kind of representation that people will buy into and see and engage with in today's debate, right? We say to you, and given this opening position, is where do we want subsidies to work best? Where is it okay to celebrate and glorify stories of working class with intentions to make profit? We say that's not okay things to do, right? We also tell you that the purpose of art also is to be representative. It is to be about lived experience, not more so about profit. Side with the side that tells you where government subsidies are going to work best. That's opening opposition.
Speech and call over.
Honorable panel, opening opposition believes that there is something wrong with being a member of working class. We think that the reason they think this is exactly because media is constantly shaming these professions. We think there is nothing wrong with being a plumber. You can make a decent salary, you can live a happy life, and not all the people should try to achieve other lifestyles if working class life can make them happier. 3 points in my speech. Firstly, why only our policy will provide freedom of choice to these people. Secondly, why these people are more likely to make wise life choices. And thirdly, why those who are already in the working class will feel significantly better. Before that, a couple of points of rebuttal. So firstly, on why people would actually watch it, answering to the POI from the closing. Firstly, because people are curious about different lifestyles. If it's a high quality art, people watch movies about like drug dealers, about very different types of people. We think, and also people are very responsive to advertisement. If we invest money in that, they would watch it. Secondly, even if like no one except working class themselves would watch it, we still think it's cool because people would agree that their life choice is great. Why it's important and why would working class people watch it? Because even like if national cinema in many countries is worse in Hollywood in terms of quality, people still watch it because it's about them. That's why working class will be structurally interested in watching this show. Secondly, from opening opposition, that it's better to show real struggles of these people. Firstly, we think that good story, even if it's glorification, is always about about struggles. Because people like to see like problem-solution framework. They don't want to see a story that is always about like a great life. They want to see a story that you firstly have a struggle, you overcome it, and then you become happy. That is exactly what we are going to show. Secondly, we are going to, as was defined by the opening government, we are going to give subsidies to the real working class people to create this art. That is why the art will be realistic, with a realistic representation of what's going on there. Secondly, we think that like documentaries, even if you are going to create documentaries, that firstly, it's not mutually exclusive, but secondly, we think that people are significantly less interested in watching these documentaries about the real life struggles. These are two different audiences. We think that like we target the significantly more people if we show these cool stories of glorification. But we are going to show why we need glorification specifically, because we want to make real working class people happier. Because if they will continue, if they watch this realistic documentaries about how shitty their life is, they will never get happy. So firstly, why do we need freedom of choice? We think that actually now you're not choosing between working class life and any other choice and any other path, because there is no representation of working class life in the media. Because like all the cool jobs are require university degrees, but secondly, most importantly, you are constantly shamed in the shows because they are constantly showing you you're not good enough. Like the most popular representation of a plumber as a profession on TV is that you're not good enough. You didn't study good enough. That's why you're lazy. That's why you're stupid. That is the only way why you did this choice. That is exactly what opening opposition is trying to provide us. That is why people feel absolutely powerless. They feel that their profession is stupid, and their children is also shamed. They feel that like their parents are just losers. So why it wouldn't change on your side of the house? For a couple of structural reasons. Firstly, like working class people who can't create realistic portrayal of their life. They do not have time. They do not have money. They do not have necessary education to create new pieces of art, like independently of this huge financial investment that we are providing. Secondly, industry is dominated by those who already have stereotypes about this art. They would likely to like entrench these stereotypes. And thirdly, we have most importantly, there is not enough demand because working class people are relatively poor. That is why there are less incentives to sell advertisement to them. That is why there are less incentives to create these types of art. Yeah, so why it's very important? Firstly, because we want to provide adequate information to people, so because they have a principal right to make wise life choices. We want to make sure that they have different stories, they have like equal representation of working class life and other sides of life in order for them to exercise their right to make a real choice. Secondly, we think that people on the principal level do not deserve to be shamed. They do not deserve to feel that they are useless, they do not deserve to feel that they are lazy and stupid if there was a real life choice. Secondly, why do they are likely to make wise life choices? We think that there are two options for these people. Firstly, they will try to enter upper middle class, as opening opposition is proposing. Secondly, they can enter like precarious, temporary jobs like Uber or something like this. So why the first option is best? They will try to enter upper middle class. They will try to get a university degree, something like this. Firstly, university degree no longer guarantees you anything in most of the developed world because you need more connections. Apart from the degree, you need connections to enter these jobs. And also, like almost everyone has a degree. But what's the problem with getting a degree? You get huge loans that you have to pay, and if you're like, if your salary does not really differ from working class salary, it means that you will be much better off in case you choose this path. No, thank you. Secondly, we think that working class people are often representative of racial minorities or ethnic minorities, and that is why they are likely to face discrimination in these jobs that are dominated by the majority. But that is why we think that for many of them, that's the next choice. Secondly, you can enter precariat, like gig economy, temporary jobs. Why this choice is likely? Because often they are on the short term more lucrative than the working class path, and that's why people may prefer to choose it. Why it's problematic? Because you have no stability. You're always afraid that you can use your job. You always have problem with your mental health. Secondly, you have no social protection such as pension, such as parental leave, and things like that. So the alternative that we are providing is that more people will choose will choose professional education, such as happening in Germany, with a guaranteed income, with a real professional such as plumber. So for two reasons we think it's more likely to happen. Firstly, the education will be provided. Firstly, because more people are going to these types of jobs, there will be more political pressure. But secondly, because other voters will be more empathetic towards these people, because now these are real people they see on TV shows, not just some abstract working class. Finally, thirdly, why do you think that those who are middle class now will feel better? It's very hard for these people now to find a meaning in your life, because your like everyday work is always about meaningless, mundane tasks. But however, on the TV now, you will see that there is something cool. You're helping people because we will always be showing how like interesting stories about your career. Why is bad now? For instance, if you're more likely to use drugs and alcohol if you feel that your job is meaningless. But secondly, if you think you're more likely to be abusive toward women in your family because you feel powerless, you feel like despised by the society. And given the stereotype about the fact that men should be powerful still exists, these people are more likely to be violent towards women, to demonstrate to themselves that they're still good, that they're still powerful, and they still like dominate, at least in their own family. For all these reasons, incredibly proud to support.
Thank the speaker for that speech, and call on the op member.
Okay, so even if, as Gov says, people are going to want to stay in the working class and be happier with this, and other people would look favorably upon it, we say this is going to be to the detriment of the working class, we say this is going to be to the detriment of society as a whole. We're going to put 2 points in exception. One, on why when the government subsidizes, it actually does pervert and control the message, why we think this is going to be harmful to the working class, and it's more likely to be governmental propaganda on this. And second of all, we're going to talk about how this actually actively prevents dealing with problems of the working class in many fields, such as education and funding they need. For that, few points of rebuttal. First of all, it is unclear why opening government tells us that now everybody is going to love the working class because they see it on TV, right? It is not entirely clear, especially if they say this is going to show a class that is entirely separate and different from the rest of society. Why would elites connect to that on a level that would make them empathize? Second of all, they say that working class have a lot of problems under status quo and do not have access to education, etc. And then they say, so we need to fund them in education. At best, their argument is not to fund them in art, but rather to fund them in aiding their lives, rather than telling them, oh, your life is shitty, but you should feel good about this. If anything, we say that is the worst of funding. We're going to get to that in extension. First point, why when the government subsidizes art, it controls narratives. We say that it is not unlikely that governments can actually do favor some political narratives, or these narratives would help them. For example, showing that the working class is great now, while also subsidizing things about how they had to struggle in the past, under previous administration, under previous political parties. Second of all, when you glorify the working class, it gives a lot of credence to for example, anti-immigration narratives saying they're taking the jobs of the working class. Because you say, these are so important to the state, these are so important to building it, and now immigrants are coming and ruining this country. And now these groups are losing this, at which point you are more likely to actually use that in this kind of rhetoric, making it far worse. Furthermore, we say, in practice, they often do subsidize propaganda for 2 reasons. For either willingly, as is the example right now in Israel, where the Minister of Culture is actively trying to set the bar on how patriotic some art is, and is some art subversive against the state. But even if not willingly, we say it is less likely for artists who feel that their art criticizes the state or shows it in a bad way, in the sense that they had to struggle, then it would be less likely that they would opt into the state for funding, but rather would only show struggles that are not by the state screwing them over, at which point they absolve themselves of the harm they're causing to these via self-selection even. But furthermore, we say that yes, and it is unlikely that this art is going to deal with what is actively harming them nowadays, and how the state of the working class is deteriorating in many countries. Why is this different than subsidizing art in general? A distinction that has not been done in this debate so far. First of all, we say, even if all art subsidies might have some degree of state propaganda, say this targets a specific class, which is a significant political class within many countries, at which point it gives a lot more influence because it is targeted for the state. Second of all, it helps the state define actively who is and who views themselves as the working class and who isn't, at which point point it is easier to turn them against other classes within the state. And finally, we say, notice there is a distinction not made in the opening half on how this affects other kinds of art. We say that when the state funds art, it is more likely to crowd out other art because there are only so many shows we can watch, so many plays we can go to. At which point we say that when the state pushes this, it is less likely to have the organic art that is better than opening opposition tells you, at which point you are more likely to get these harms, right? Why do we think that this act also further actively prevents dealing with the problems of the working class? First of all, we say that yes, it does progress the narrative of earning less and jobs which give you less power in society are better. But we say furthermore, we say that when there are a lot of problems due to neglect, that it is less likely that, for example, glorifying the working art is going to deal with the fact that they did not choose the rural life, but rather cities have progressed away from them to different kind of jobs, at which point it appears as if they have chosen to walk away from that, not yet. We say second of all, when you show, as opening government tells us, how enjoyable their life is, how interesting, how they love to choose that, it actively takes away from the narrative of they don't actually have the same access to education, which would actually enable them to choose that life, but rather they are locked in them by an apathetic state. It is less likely to also gain political capital to invest in it, because when they say that they need that investment from a government that previously neglected them, they are less likely to have that at the point where the rest of the state sees that they have a great life, that they are glorified, and these are the right jobs for people to have, meaning they are less likely to have these options. Before I continue, I will take closing.
But the alternative here is that there is no art about these people whatsoever. It means that no one in this world even care about them.
First of all, this is not true. We can give you examples. We can see things like Shameless, for example, which clearly shows the poor and working class within England and in an American version as well, I think. Second of all, we say that you can see this in a variety of shows, like Two Brokers. A lot of shows which show their happiness and their hardships and these problems, and a lot of documentaries detailing how they are being screwed over. The things we said are more likely to be crowded out when you fund and then push things that glorify them and only have a limited headspace and you want to see something fun right now, right? Furthermore, we say that even within the working class, this causes an issue because they tell us that Suits, for example, glorifies is the white culture. It also has a flip side of, for example, when we deal with mental health in the upper class, it is less likely that when they tell you how good your life is and how everyone is having fun, you would speak out about your depression, about how you're suffering, about how you're struggling. In the same way, for example, when the opiate crisis massively, disproportionately harms the working class, and someone can't deal and can't be a part of this, and can barely work at their job, they're less likely to speak out because their life are supposed to be being glorified, are supposed to be amazing, and how productive they are, and they are struggling to remain. It is less likely for them to speak up, to ask for help within the community. Less likely for the communities to then talk about the issues plaguing them. Less likely for them to demand political change and use that political capital in order to actually talk about these issues as a bloc and achieve the funds that they tell us that governments are denying them. So we tell you for other people to care about the problems of the working class, for the working class to care about the problems of the working class, and to end this neglect, do not tell them that they are amazing while you're screwing them over.
I'm speaking that speech and call on the government whip.
Dear panel, 3 points in my speech. Firstly, they ask why rich people would watch it. Alex tells you the answer, because it's curious, because they are curious, because it's interesting to see a story. Compare it to documentaries, which are basically not interesting to anyone, which people do not relate, rich people specifically do not relate. Comparatively, so struggle, everyday struggle, all the people who are now going to be glorified and therefore drawn to by those people. Then they say, but you'd better fund education for those people. We say it's A, not mutually exclusive, B, more likely to happen on our side. Why? Because the shift of the perspective. Right now, because of glorification of luxurious lifestyle, those people in working class professions, their parents, are seen as either lazy or stupid. You didn't study hard enough to get a scholarship. You didn't excel in your work enough to become a manager instead of being just a person on a low level. We say comparatively, if you see that there are structural reasons why those people cannot escape that, and still they are the backbone of our economy, and still they're doing a significant job, you are more likely to listen to those people in the context of classroom, in the context of board meeting, in any other context, you weigh those people more if they are not by definition negative. Lastly, then they say that anti-immigration narrative will be stronger. There are many structural reasons why people do not like immigrants. It can be cultural anxiety. It can be because you're basically a racist, many other things. But you say, even if it's true, maybe sometimes it is good to listen to people who can be whose jobs and livelihoods can be taken away by free trade agreements and other kind of agreements which do neglect them. Then we hear that state is imposing their vision of what working class is and will neglect the problems of the state. We say that fundamentally the interests of the state are aligned with the interests of the working class. That is to say, maximize economic output, and therefore the state has an incentive to indeed show that those people are good, that they should proceed and work better. We say that even if the state does not emphasize its specific problem, we say the main abuser of the working class is capitalism, and presumably it will be identified in those movies. Then we hear that those people will not basically now fight for any improvement of their lifestyle. I think it's a broad assumption that they are stupid. We say that if at the point when you're a working class person, you still want to fight against, for example, abuses at the workplace, you still want to vote for certain candidates, right? Because you want a better lifestyle for yourself. The only difference is now you do not feel active shame, and now you feel some kind of meaning within the context of a larger society, not being simply forgotten, but being an essential part of the economy within your own state. Okay. People cannot access other institutions. We say it doesn't change on their side of the house as well. Here we bring some more analysis than OG does. We say that at the point when still poor, working class people, numerically packed in small areas like not gentrified, but gerrymandered, and therefore do not exert political pressure regardless of their numerical supremacy. Secondly, they cannot donate to political parties to achieve any kind of sustainable political change. Elites have an incentive to sustain status quo because they have like very convenient lifestyle at the moment, which means that they will not see structural changes for those people on their side. Which means that the question of this debate is how those people perceive themselves and some other attitudes of rich people. They change for the better on our side, specifically because of perceptual change. We are more likely to see rich people resonating more with the messages and with the candidates who are talking about hardships of those people comparatively to the narratives on their side. Okay, the next point in my speech, opening opposition. Firstly, they say that we create an illusion because we downplay many hardships of those people. We say that actually we counterbalance the illusions they create, not illusions, but active denigration of low-income lifestyle on their side of the house. Why does it happen? Because it's a logical extension of glamorizing rich people lifestyle, which means that because of exclusion of that lifestyle for many other people, it means that they're doing something wrong, and we simply reestablish the balance. Then they say that that white rich people will do those narratives and therefore it would be bad. No, we don't have to stand for a stupid model. As Sasha says, presumably we will involve a lot of working class people. Maybe we will give even subsidies to those people themselves. Okay, and lastly they say, it would be better if those people were believing in a narrative of some kind of opera, that even from lower middle class, some kind of American dream, you can achieve anything. The problem is, at the point when those structural barriers kick in, you blame yourself, you shame yourself on their side of the house for not achieving those success. This is deceiving them. This is the delusion that they create, and we say that it's horrible. Closing.
Yes, but if elites have an interest in preserving the status quo, then as we tell you, it is more likely they would subsidize things that make the working class more complacent and less actually politically active about their problems.
No, still those people do understand. Poor people are in the best position to understand what they need, and they will still continue to ask for what they want. The only difference is Now you can conceptualize yourself as something more than nothing. Okay, now let's be very clear. Opening government tells you that those people will be actively feel better about themselves. Alex weaponizes that point significantly. We say at the point when your profession from which you cannot escape basically leads to alcohol abuse because you want to forget the reality from which you're doing that. The fact that opioid crisis in America today affects mostly people of working class backgrounds is indicative of that. In Russia, it's the same. Alcohol abusers are mostly people from working class. Why? Because you do not have many other entertainments. You cannot go to media, to theaters. How you can entertain yourself is through that. Secondly, self-actualization of males who want to exert aggression on women and kids for that purpose, and therefore those are suffering the most from that families. More importantly, kids within schools who are afraid of telling who their parents are, where they work, and who shame themselves are also the new victims we bring to you from side closing government. Next, in terms of principle clash, opening government tells you that some countries we need to restore the balance. Firstly, because some countries fought communism with that, okay, context specific. Secondly, because writers cannot empathize with the poor. Up to you whether or not all the people are like that. We bring to you structural reasons why that art would never appear. Why? Because poor people today have a demand, but cannot pay for Netflix and cannot go to the cinema, right? Therefore, there is no incentive for the media to cater to them, and therefore this right will never appear on their side of the house. But lastly, and crucially, we say at the point, we look beyond like current generation of people, and we tell you that people who are teenagers today, instead of pursuing things like going to colleges, which are not necessarily going to be the best to allow them to succeed, and they will not get connections, it's better for them to go to the well-paying professions, which will guarantee them steady impact, as opposed to student loan, which will crumble their ability, financial stability in the future. For these reasons, propose.
Thank the Speaker for that speech and call on the opposition witness.
Think for a second what governments are trying to do. If indeed, as they portray it, movies, TV shows, has such an immense impact on people's life, it changes how they perceive themselves. It changes how they perceive society and the problems within it. It is inconceivable then that a state, a powerful actor like that, would not abuse it to its own power. We've heard no mechanism of why they wouldn't abuse it to its own power. They say, well, you just wouldn't subsidize it. We'll say, fine, you get the fiat that they must subsidize it. You don't get the fiat that they must always do it in a great fashion that would always be beneficial for everyone. We give you the proper analysis, the likely analysis of how this would play out in the world. Two clashes in this debate. One about positive representation, two about accurate representation. Let's begin. Okay, so first of all about positive representation. Look, opening government says we just want them to feel better about themselves. And CG goes along with those lines. We have quite a bit of rebuttal to that. First of all, we really don't understand why that art does not exist today. We've given you example. You want something that is like clearly positive, we've given you like all the comedy, right? Like Two Broke Girls, you have Roseanne. If you want black representation, you have Family Matters. That was even back in the 90s, right? The idea that they have nothing is ridiculous. Now, CG says, oh, but you never have any interest to do anything for them because they're poor. Not to the extent that they can't go to a movie. Not to the extent that they can't afford Netflix. Like, they are not homeless, they are working class people, right? So first of all, the assumption that they have nothing is preposterous to begin. But secondly, we say, we don't see how they would feel a lot better about themselves if this is an inaccurate representation of them, which we will show you that it is. Thirdly, we say it's very unlikely that it would actually be targeted at all working class people. In fact, we told you it is the interest of the government to in fact divide the working class people, being like, well, some of you are like real working class people, possibly like white Americans who live in rural areas, but you know what? If you're Hispanic, if you're black, maybe not so much. Maybe it's more useful to pit you one against each other, as we've explained the likely scenario. Because this is crucial, right? Owo said that this positive that said that this kind of positive representation causes people to overlook the problems. And CG is correct in pointing out that even in positive aspects, you still show some struggle, right? Just to make it interesting. You still show some problems that these people have. And we say, aha, exactly. But the fact that you are in control of which problems is exactly the problem. We said, how can this be abused and likely? A, by deciding who is at fault for those hardships and situations. Is the government at fault? No, it is immigrants if that is the policy that I want. It could be bankers if that's what I want to push. It could be the other party and their past policies if that's what I want to push. Secondly, it's by deciding, as we told you, who is and isn't part of the middle class and pitting you against each other if that's my political interest. Thirdly, it's about telling you what is a personal struggle that you can overcome yourself and what is a systemic issue that the government should probably be held liable to fix. We're telling you that all of those, exactly because the struggles that you show in such a positive manner, they can be something that is like too serious, too troubling, too dark, too opiate epidemic, as we told you, exactly is the reason why we bring the analysis that shows you, in fact, why the real issues are not going to be dealt with. So some issues, maybe, not the real issues, and it would be severely abused by government, right? We also tell you the impacts of that in real life. We tell you that exactly because this is how this group might view themselves, and specifically why other groups in the country view themselves that way. That means that they wouldn't be able to allocate funds to those people who frankly have it quite well. Sure, they have some personal struggles, but they deal with it themselves. It means that the opiate crisis absolutely like plaguing the working class in America, for example, is not really something that we should deal with, because you know what? This is not on those shows. It means that they don't use, themselves don't go and use state support because they feel it is illegitimate for them to complain, to ask for help. So we're saying on our side, and we are literally the first team in the bit to actually show that we show to you concrete, real harms to people who might be losing out on opportunities, losing out on jobs, losing out on help, and losing out on their health and benefits. And for all those reasons, we say on that alone we would win this debate. But let's win also on accuracy, because we're saying, look, since you would not provide them with accurate representation, it also means that it is less likely that they in fact would feel so good about themselves. Why is that very unlikely to be accurate on our side? Before I move on, let's take from OG. Yes.
You guys have been asserting that you will get accurate representation in your world. Given that the state and capitalist structures are so bad, why are we likely to see, like, give us structural reasons for why accurate representation happens in your world?
Sure, literally what I'm going to do now. Why do we get accurate representation on our world? First of all, as I told you, there are those who want to appeal to those people. Since those people want to see themselves portrayed accurately and positively, those who appeal to that kind of audience already create. What happens on your side, however, we say, first of all, you crowd out those people, right? Because this is the government subsidizing what is beneficial for the government and not what those people actually want to see, right? So we're saying, sure, that is, first of all, the attempt of crowding out there. No. But secondly, we tell you, but then they say, oh no, we'll solve this. We say, we will pay immediately to the people who are middle class. First of all, we're kind of like making that they did after Prime Minister, which is kind of illegitimate. But we were saying, please notice, if that is true, why force them to glorify it? If you just want more middle class artists, working class artists, just let them do whatever the hell they want to do. Why would you limit them if you want them to represent themselves? It makes no sense. Why limit them to only glorifying portrayals? And we say exactly that kind of limitation is what enables the government to do what we tell you. Because it's exactly what has ability, instead of like saying, oh, you're a working class artist, let's pay you. They're going, no, we're going to review your art, see if it fits our agenda, and then decide whether or not we're willing to pay for that. That kind of filtering mechanism is exactly what government allows on their side, which isn't allowed on the status quo. And we say it's very good and it should be that way, that it isn't allowed on the status quo. What else did we get? We heard that that now more working class people would grow up to be artists and represent themselves. Why? OGS themselves shown us the problem with that. That they that this is a very unsafe line of work. That it's a very closed circuit that it's hard to get in. That is required education that it might be not a good idea according to CG. That art that represents them today is not about them being artists, but about them being working class people. So for all those reasons we say, you're getting A, inaccurate art, B, bad art that would allow you to dismiss real challenges in the world, we beg you to oppose.
All right, thanks for a great debate, everyone. Please head out quickly so we can start the deliberation.
What's happening? What's happening?